Let's stop pretending. You already know what you need to do, so why aren't you doing it? It's not lack of time, it's not lack of discipline, and it's definitely not lack of information. You're avoiding it. Every single day, you wake up with clarity, and then you betray it. You distract yourself, you delay, you negotiate with your own potential, and the worst part, you already know you're doing it. So let me ask you something, and don't lie to yourself this time. What's the one thing you keep avoiding that if you actually did it consistently would change everything? Write it in the comments. Not for me, for you. Because until you face it, you'll keep living the same day, over and over again, calling it trying, when it's actually avoidance. And if that hits a nerve, good. Now we can finally talk about what's really controlling you. The problem isn't that you can't be consistent. It's that the version of you trying to be consistent isn't real. Think about it. Every time you decide to change, you create this ideal version in your head. Someone focused, disciplined, in control. Someone who wakes up early, does what needs to be done and doesn't hesitate. But that version only exists for a few hours. Because the moment discomfort shows up, your real identity takes over. And your real identity is not built on what you want. It's built on what you've been repeating. That's why you keep falling back. Not because you're weak, but because your actions are still aligned with who you believe you are, not who you're trying to become. You say you want discipline, but deep down, you still see yourself as someone who procrastinates. You say you want change, but your behavior keeps confirming your old identity. And consistency doesn't come from forcing action. It comes from alignment. Until your identity changes, every effort will feel temporary. And every attempt will slowly collapse back into what's familiar. And this is where most people get stuck. They keep trying to force consistency, using the same mindset that created their inconsistency. It doesn't make sense. You're trying to build discipline with a mind that's trained to escape effort. So what happens? At the beginning, you rely on motivation. You feel driven. You feel clear. You tell yourself, this time I'm serious. But motivation is emotional, and emotions are unstable. The moment you don't feel like doing it, everything starts to fall apart. You hesitate, you delay, you tell yourself you'll do it later, and later becomes tomorrow. Tomorrow becomes next week, and suddenly, you're back at the beginning. Again. Not because you don't care, but because you've been using the wrong mechanism. Consistency is not built on how you feel. It's built on what you tolerate, what you're willing to do even when it's uncomfortable, boring, repetitive, and invisible. Because that's where most people quit, not when it's hard, but when it stops being exciting. And if your identity is still attached to comfort, you will always choose what feels easier, even when you know it's costing your future. Here's what most people never realize. You're not avoiding the action. You're avoiding the version of yourself that the action requires. Because doing what you know you should do comes with a cost. It demands a different standard, a different level of responsibility, a different identity, and that's uncomfortable, not physically, psychologically. Because if you actually become consistent, you lose the excuse. You can no longer say, I could if I wanted to. You either do it, or you face the truth. And for a lot of people, that's the real fear, not failure, but clarity. Because once it's clear that the only thing in the way is you, there's nowhere left to hide. So what do? You stay in the loop. You try just enough to feel like you're progressing, but not enough to actually change. You stay busy. You stay distracted. You stay almost there. Because almost is safe. Almost protects your identity. It lets you believe you're capable without ever having to prove it. And that's why you feel stuck, not because you don't know what to do, but because doing it would force you to become someone you're not ready to be yet. So if forcing yourself doesn't work and motivation keeps failing you, what actually creates consistency? A decision most people avoid, not to do more, but to stop negotiating with yourself. Right now, your life is being shaped by small negotiations you barely notice. I'll start tomorrow. I'm tired today. Just this once. And every time you say that, you reinforce the same identity you're trying to escape. Because consistency isn't broken in big moments. It's broken in small ones. In the seconds where you choose comfort over alignment. And here's the shift. Consistent people don't win because they feel stronger. They win because they removed the option to negotiate. There's no debate, no internal conversation, no emotional check. They don't ask themselves if they feel like doing it. They just do it. Not because it's easy, but because for them, not doing it is no longer an option. That's the difference. You're still giving yourself a way out. And as long as that exit exists, you will keep taking it. So how do you actually stop negotiating with yourself? Not by trying harder, by removing the decision altogether. Because every time you decide in the moment, you open space for emotion to interfere. And emotion is always looking for relief. That's why you need something stronger than willpower. You need structure, something that runs even when you don't feel like showing up. Because discipline is not about intensity. It's about automation. It's about turning actions into non-negotiable standards, like brushing your teeth. You don't wake up and ask yourself if you feel like it. You just do it. Not because you're motivated, but because it's part of who you are. That's the level you need to reach, where the action stops being a choice and starts being an expectation. And the only way to build that is by lowering the barrier, not making it impressive, making it inevitable. Small enough that you can't avoid it. Clear enough that you don't question it. Repeatable enough that it becomes part of your identity. Because consistency doesn't come from doing a lot. It comes from doing the same thing, even when it feels insignificant. So if small actions are easier, why do you still avoid even those? Because the resistance was never about the size of the task. It's about what the task represents. Every time you do what you said you would do, you're reinforcing a new identity. And that creates internal friction. Because your mind is wired to protect what's familiar, even if what's familiar is keeping you stuck. So when you try to change, even in small ways, something inside you pushes back. Not loudly, subtly. You forget. You delay. You replace it with something more urgent, and it feels justified. But it's not. It's protection. Protection of the version of you that already exists. Because consistency threatens that version. It forces an update. And updates require letting go of habits, of patterns, of excuses. And most people don't fail because they can't improve. They fail because they're not willing to release who they've been. So they stay in conflict, wanting change, but protecting the identity that prevents it. And that tension, that's what you feel every time you say, I know what to do, but I'm not doing it. So if the problem is identity, then consistency is not something you build. It's something you become. And this is where most people get it wrong. They wait to act until they feel like the person who would act. But it works the other way around. You act first, and the identity follows, not through big changes, through proof. Every time you do what you said you would do, even when it's small, even when no one sees, you create evidence. And your brain doesn't argue with evidence. It adapts to it. That's how identity shifts. Not through affirmations, not through thinking differently, but through repeated, undeniable proof. I show up. I follow through. I do it anyway. At first it feels fake, like you're forcing something that isn't you, but that's exactly what's supposed to happen, because you're interrupting a pattern that's been running for years. And patterns don't break with intention. They break with repetition. So stop trying to feel ready. Start collecting proof. Because the more evidence you build, the less resistance you feel. And eventually, you won't need to force consistency anymore, because it will feel like you. Here's the excuse that quietly destroys your consistency. I'll do it when I'm ready. Sounds reasonable, but it's a trap. Because ready is not a state you arrive at. It's a state you create through action. Waiting to feel ready is just another way of delaying discomfort. It gives you permission to stay where you are, while convincing yourself you're being patient. But look at your pattern. How long have you been getting ready? How many times have you told yourself soon, later, when things calm down, and what actually changed? Nothing. Because readiness doesn't come first. Action does. Clarity does. Repetition does. And then, after you've already started, after you've already shown up a few times. You look back and realize you were never ready. You just stopped waiting. That's the shift. Consistent people don't feel more prepared than you. They just move before they feel prepared. They act in uncertainty. They act without guarantees. They act without emotional confirmation. And that's why they build momentum, while you stay stuck waiting for a feeling that never arrives. At some point, you have to stop analyzing your life and start confronting it. Because right now, you don't need more information. You don't need another strategy, another plan, another perfect system. You already know enough. The real question is, how much longer are you going to ignore it? Because every day you delay, you're not just staying in the same place, you're reinforcing it. You're making the pattern stronger, the habit deeper, the identity more fixed. And over time, it becomes harder to break. Not because it's impossible, but because it becomes familiar, and familiar feels safe, even when it's slowly costing you everything you say you want. So understand this. The longer you wait, the more you train yourself not to act. And eventually, inaction stops feeling like a problem. It starts feeling normal. That's when people truly get stuck, not when they fail, but when they stop expecting more from themselves, when they lower the standard just enough to stay comfortable while convincing themselves they're still trying. So here's the truth. Without filters, your life is not going to change because you understand this. It's going to change the moment you stop negotiating with what you already know. Not tomorrow, not next week, now. Because the version of you that keeps waiting will always find a reason to wait a little longer. But the version of you that acts doesn't need perfect conditions. It just needs a decision, a clear, uncomfortable decision. I'm not avoiding this anymore. And then you prove it, not with a big transformation, but with the next action, the one you've been delaying. The one you keep thinking about still but don't do. That's the moment that matters, not this video, not the idea, that moment. Because that's where identity shifts, that's where consistency begins, and that's where your life actually starts to move. So don't close this video and go back to the same pattern. Interrupt it right now, do the thing you've been avoiding. And when you do, you won't just feel different, you'll know you're no longer the same person.